Now the fun part.
That's right. We get to do this again. I can't see a single soul, but I know there's about 2,000 people out there. Actually, I do see one. I see an original Ursa Major satellite vehicle commander in General Whiting there,
Nice.
right? Am I right, sir?
Yeah,
there we go. Thank you all for coming. Space Power number 3, 2025. I can tell already that it has gotten bigger, for sure, and you will see over the next couple days that it has gotten better as well. Let's go ahead and kind of do a little bit of a reprise of our, I don't know, it's just a conversation, you and me in a living room, I guess.
So Secretary Mink said, hey, I hear you're going to answer questions after the fact. You know, can I ask a few questions? I said, absolutely not.
He just texted me. No, in all seriousness for everybody, we've done this a couple different ways the last 2 years, but this year we went back to something we did the first year, and the chief's office sent an email out to the field and pulsed the field for what questions would you like to ask. So over 260 questions have come in from the field across all your field commands, service components, headquarters, guardians and other organizations, combatant commands. The good news or the bad news, depending on your perspective and your perspective, we're not going to get to all of those today. So, but I do get to invoke moderator privilege and ask one on my own to start. And you know, just probably 2 weeks ago, you released a vector. So as I was reading through that, it occurred to me, and then I've at least heard multiple conversations, you know, in the hallways here. A lot of what's in the vector is things that you've already published. Matter of fact, you had a slide earlier that had a bunch of the documents that the service has published recently. So from your perspective, as the person who said, hey, we need this vector, why? It seems to be a compilation of what's already there. So why is the vector important?
Well, I think that's fair. It is a compilation of other documents. But what I was hearing from the field and even some of the senior leaders on the staff is there seems like a lot of changes, a lot of things that the service is doing, almost to the point where they're exhausted trying to just keep track of the changes, much less do the changes. And I wanted to make sure everybody understood that we're not just making changes because there's a bunch of good ideas and we're trying to implement good ideas. They all fit together. All of the initiatives that we're exploring, all of the initiatives that we're trying to implement fit together to turn into what the service needs to do its basic functions. And so when you look at the document, you'll see it's laid out as a, hey, here's what we're trying to do, here's our theory of success, and here are the 4 fundamental activities that all services have to be responsible for: force design, force development, force generation, and force employment. And so when you think about that as a service, we have those responsibilities. And so we have to have specific activities and initiatives that make sure we have the right force design, that we are developing our people, we can generate combat power, and that then we're employing and performing the missions that combatant commanders like General Whiting need done. And so those subordinate initiatives, if you will, fit together. We can't just say we're not going to stand up training and education for our guardians. We're going to focus on, you know, advanced training and simulators. Well, okay, that's a part of it, but we have to get all of it together because the service is responsible for all those activities. So it's one document that tries to show how they fit together.
Fair enough. So on the topic of change, and lots of it, there's a slew of questions here that came in. As a matter of fact, so about 44% of the responses came in focused on training and education. The next highest category at 25% was focused on force design, and so we'll cover a few of those as we go through this. But on the training and education front, I'm going to do a couple questions because I found as I looked at these, it was a little bit interesting, ironic, but it's an insight into the world of the headquarters and trying to affect change and the reasons why. So a major from STARCOM asked, with the changes being made to both officer and enlisted development pipelines, how will we ensure any guardians are specialized in anything versus everyone just being a generalist with varying experiences? Now, before you answer, because I'm sure you have an answer there, I thought it was interesting. Here's a couple other ones. An NCO from STARCOM asked, what is the Space Force doing to ensure our guardians are not only technically proficient, but also develop strong leadership, critical thinking, and ethical decision-making skills? Next, company grade officer from the 5th EWS. How do you define the right balance between cultivating deep technical expertise in space warfighting and maintaining broad integration across joint and allied operations. So there's this dichotomy in there, but it's a reality. So from your perspective, this is a 3-for-1. You can answer these and cover three of those questions.
And first of all, they're great questions. And it speaks to, how important the development of an entire service is. Do we need deep expertise? Absolutely. Do we need people that broadly understand how to integrate with the joint force? Absolutely. How do you do both? I don't know. It's really hard. Like this is the tough part of the job, is you have to get that balance just right. So I think the best way to think about it is if you go down to kind of the micro management side of this and say, how do I develop a single Guardian to best perform? Then you get caught in that conundrum. Do I want that Guardian to be deep and expert in one particular area, or do I want them to have broad understanding? That creates a conundrum. At my level, I have to think about, what do I need the entire service to be able to do? Do I need deep experts? Yes. Do I need broad integrators? Yes. So we have to find a way to, across the entire service, create opportunities to maximize what people can do, what they do best, and fill the jobs that are required based on those skills and those competencies. So there will be jobs where we have to focus on depth, and there will be other jobs that have to focus on broader integration type activities. And we want to give them the training, the education, the experiential opportunities to make sure the right person has the right skills and experience to going into those jobs. And so what I would ask is just to make sure you think about it from an enterprise perspective. And what might apply to any one Guardian doesn't necessarily have to apply to all Guardians. And then as you think about the categories of Guardians we have, then you can start to have maybe more sweeping general statements. I really want the enlisted corps to think of themselves as the tactical experts, deep in a mission area, deep understanding of mission area. They may track along a mission area for much longer than their officer counterparts. But I'll need the officers, rather than saying generalists, we're going to make them experts in joint integration, experts in leadership, expert in all of the other service functions that are required. So they'll be experts in a different set to make sure that we bring all that to bear. So they'll have different opportunities. And then our civilian corps, that cadre of civilians that is that corporate knowledge for some of the things we just don't train in our military, or where you need you need a lot of time in a job to really develop the kind of expertise. So we categorically think about it, but we have to think about depth and breadth as a service, not each individual having depth and breadth. That's too tough.
All right, perfect. Let's pivot to a little bit more specific piece of the training and education front. So obviously, very exciting news you were just talking about. You guys are getting ready to start a captain's leadership course at Texas A&M. And so here's a question from company grade officer in Delta 13. What was the intent for creating the captain's leadership course separate from squadron officer school? Isn't there value in gaining experience by talking with other services and how we can work together?
Yeah, of course there's value in that. So if you follow that logic, though, to its full extent, you would say, why does the Air Force have SOS? Why don't we just go to the Army's captain's course? I mean, they were teaching those people beforehand. We could just all go to one course. The bottom line is each service brings something unique in terms of what it focuses on for professional military education. I remember General Raymond, when he stood up the service, talked about some of the things that services have to do. You have to have your own budget. You have to have your own doctrine. You have to develop your own people. And that's kind of stuck with me. We have to develop our Guardians for the specifics of the Space Force. And this basic understanding at the captain's level is going to be foundational to what follows in the rest of their career. And so while we need to find ways to give them experience with other services, I wanted to make sure that the service had a core offering at that grade to educate our officers on the Space Force. Now we're going to include joint doctrine, we'll include communications and leadership, but they need that foundational understanding of the service first before they start to branch out and figure out how they integrate with the other services.
It's interesting. I remember conversations that you or I had with some of our senior leaders or mentors talking about, hey, when should I go to this school? When should I go to that school? And I remember something that stuck with me, and that was, hey, as you're in your junior school years, go learn your service inside and out, because as you progress in your career, we're going to need you to integrate with the other services. We're going to need you to defend the position that makes sense for our service in order to support the joint force and to provide capabilities to combatant commanders. And so this seems to fit along those lines.
It does, and that's exactly what I was thinking about is, yes, it's helpful to understand the other services. It's helpful to have, as a complementary bit of your education, an understanding of what they do and what they bring to the fight. But you're required to have expert level knowledge of your service. When you go into a joint environment, what they expect Guardians to be able to talk about is the Space Force. That's a mandatory requirement. And then additionally, you can be better at integrating if you understand a little bit about the other services, but we couldn't forego that foundational education.
Got it. All right, so let's shift gears. We'll take advantage of you being in your 4th year now as the Chief of Space Operations. Here's one from a field grade officer in Delta 3. If I had 5 minutes with the Chief of Space Operations, I would be interested to hear what Space Force accomplishment he was most proud of during his tenure as CSO thus far, and what has been the greatest challenge for him as the service's leader.
I have gotten asked that question a couple times, and it's really hard. It really is. It's like, hey, which of your kids do you like best? We all have an answer to that. We just aren't allowed to say it, right?
Now, wait a minute. You told all of them that you expect them to do hard things.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's time to
pick one,
walk
right?
the walk.
Yeah. No, it is hard for me not to, just sitting here today, having experienced Guardian Arena a couple of days ago. I was telling that crowd at the dinner event that, it was literally a sheet of paper going, hey, what if we did this? What if we had a competition? What if we tried to get teams to compete in bases and deltas? And it was literally just, a few paragraphs of thoughts. I still have that piece of paper. I'm gonna hang on to that one because I do feel like it's something that I thought was missing in the service, this idea of competition and esprit de corps and how can we do this? And so seeing that go from a piece of paper with a few ideas on it into what I saw a couple days ago, that was amazing. The spirit, the camaraderie, the commitment, what they accomplished. For those that aren't familiar, they started on Tuesday at 7:30 in the morning, had to get through something like 13 different stations. Does that sound about right? Or maybe more than that. By the time you got through all the stations, you had to run a half marathon. It was like 13 miles just to get through the course. And it's mental challenges, it's physical challenges, and then after all that, there's this final event that if all I had to do was that final event, I would not have been successful. You had to be a team, you had to throw this 150-pound sack over 4 players and run. I mean, it was awe-inspiring. I'm really proud of that event and the kind of camaraderie that it started to instill. You see, if you think it's just an athletic competition, you miss it. It shows what's required in terms of planning, preparation, training, discipline, focus, teamwork. The things that made you successful in those 2 days is what makes you successful in the missions. So I'm just really proud of how much we breathed life into that. It was really fun to watch. The hardest thing, I think, is, December of 2019, the law said there is a Space Force. Go. And nothing could have been further from the truth. There wasn't a Space Force. It legally made there be a Space Force, but it was still in work. It was thought process. It was pulling things together as rapidly as possible. So I think the hardest thing is overcoming this mentality that there's been a Space Force for decades, for years. We've got all this figured out. There's processes. What do you mean you're still sorting out a uniform? Where's your uniform? Like, these are hard things to do on a government scale with government oversight and government resources. And so the idea of convincing people that we had to start from scratch on almost every process we had, on every decision we make that was unprecedented, and convincing people that we don't really have anything to fall back on. If I don't deliver a service dress, then we're using an Air Force service dress. Like, there wasn't something else. We had plenty of uniform changes when we were growing up, but there was always an Air Force uniform before those changes that we were in until we transitioned. Not the case for the Space Force. We've had to start from scratch, and convincing people that that's an additional hurdle. We're not just enhancing the Space Force, we're actually creating one. And that's been a real challenge. Fun, Don't get me wrong, a lot of fun, but it's a challenge.
Absolutely. Well, anything worthwhile doing is going to take a little bit of effort.
Amen.
So we didn't create the first new service in 70 plus years because it was an easy type thing, right?
Exactly
It's going to be
right.
hard challenges.
That's exactly right.
All right, this one might have been one of my favorites, and so I made sure it had to be in the deck here. So a field grade officer from System Delta 89 asked this question. He said, every young Guardian or Airman has likely thought, if I'm the chief for a day, I would change X. I think I might be able to solve your budget problem if I ask for a show of hands of the number of people that have had that conversation with you at some point growing up in your career. So now here you are. So the follow-on was, what was your thing or things that you wanted to change when you were younger, and have you followed through on that change?
When I was a junior officer, I had complete faith in the Chief of the Air Force. I listened to everything he said. I never had a doubt that he had my best interest. Yeah, I think that the thing that was probably on my mind when I was a junior officer, the things that are most tangible, I remember is kind of how the personnel system worked. I remember thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. You know, that you felt like a cog in the machine, or you were just a number, or you were just a body. And we all talk about the flesh peddlers that just assign people to positions because they have to fill requirements. And I do remember thinking, surely we can do better than that. And you know, as you grow up and get older, you realize all the complexities, and large organizations, you know, kind of struggle with these things. But I do think, and I think we have worked hard to do this, is because our size is smaller than the other services, and I say this to the S1 team all the time, surely we can apply more individualized attention to our PCS process, to our promotion process, to our performance reporting criteria. Like, surely we can think about this at an individual level to make sure we're accounting for case-by-case kinds of basis. We all had friends that couldn't join because they were colorblind, right? And it didn't matter what they were going to try to do. The rule was colorblind, and you can't possibly be anything different than that. Well, we're trying to explore waivers and try to get past that, because we think case by case, it may not make sense for everybody. And so I really do think we've worked hard to not have these blanket kinds of personnel policies, to take individual people's considerations to heart, and implement things on a case-by-case basis. That was something I saw early on, is that we didn't always do it that way, that sometimes it was about the numbers and filling the quotas and the requirements, and I think we've done a little better job of getting that done.
If I could riff on one of your lines from the movie on the invisible front line, obviously the services, but if you ask me from my time, you looked this way when you said S1, so, I see Miss Kelly. So if you ask me, the S1 is like the invisible front line of the service, yeah, right? Because all of that has to happen, but it happens in the background. And to your point, when it doesn't happen well, then it's in the foreground. So good job keeping it all in the background.
Yeah, they wish they could be invisible sometimes. They're like, Kate, get up here. Like, I need to hear like, what's going on. Yeah.
All right, let's pivot to force design then. We've got a question from a field grade officer in a Delta 1 squadron. It says, how are we making sure that the systems we acquire actually meet the effects that we need in the future? And do we have a deliberate plan for taking into account other services needs when we plan for these systems?
Yeah, great question, and a couple of thoughts there. One is, there was a lot of discussion about Futures Command, and there might be some concern that it didn't get rolled out, you know, or we didn't implement or establish as fast as we could. I think that was just in the changeover of the administration, we kind of re-looked at the things we were working on, make sure we had our priorities consistent with how the new leadership wanted to handle things. I can confirm this 100%. Secretary Mink understands fully what we were trying to accomplish with Futures Command, with the activities, the importance of it, and it goes right to the heart of this question. You know, how are we looking at the future? How are we categorizing and characterizing the threats we're going to face, the missions we're going to be asked to do, and how are we going to respond so that we can put the force in place to meet those challenges, meet those missions? And so standing up this organization where we will look at concepts, we will do the wargaming, we will do the simulations, we will do all the assessment, the manpower assessment, we will do the MILCON surveys to figure out what facilities are needed. and then document that in the objective force so that everybody can see what we're progressing towards, what we think that end state, in the 15-year range needs to look like, so that we can grow methodically and make sure we have those capabilities when they're necessary. So it is this idea of establishing a command that's focused on what is it we're going to need in the future and making sure all the planning is done, synchronized with the resources so we get that right. That's really the heart of the effort, to make sure we get that right. And then the second part of the question, sorry, this is me putting him on the spot now.
So the second part was, do we have a deliberate plan? I think you sort of answered both as you went through, but.
Great.
All
I agree. I answered that perfectly.
Brilliant. Okay, let's pivot to support to the Joint Force. So I had a chance this year to participate with the team at Space Force Indo-Pac during Resolute Space. Secretary Mink talked about it as well in his remarks. Here's a question from a company grade officer in Delta One. What is the future of service components? Right now, their staffing levels and lack of assigned assets appears to be in conflict. How do we make the service components effective warfighting units?
Well, two things. One, we know they're vital. I get the feedback from the combatant commands routinely of how much better even the initial effort, as understaffed and under-resourced as they are, how important they are to progressing space and integration into the others. And I'm mostly talking about those outside of U.S. Space Command. As I think these gentlemen would tell you up front, we have a pretty robust service component because of how much work needs to be done in U.S. Space Command. So I'm really happy there. But the others, it's a couple of dozen people in some places, sometimes smaller than that. And they're already performing miraculous things to make sure we're integrated properly. But they're understaffed, no doubt. My philosophy is get something started and then make it better. If you wait until you have all of the people, everybody trained, everything, all the mission analysis is complete, and then we stand it up, it would just take years. Combatant commands can't wait. We've got the work that has to be done immediately. So we have to start quick and understand that we're going to improve every year, but we can't hold up waiting for the perfect amount of staffing. The complication is it requires to integrate space with these combatant commands. It takes a lot of experience that you don't get with brand new accessions. It wouldn't be fair to throw our newest Guardians out into these theaters to try to integrate space capabilities. And the thing I can't rush is years of experience. How long does it take to give somebody 5 years of experience, right? There's just no way to accelerate that timeline. So as we gain the experience, as we grow the maturity of our service, then we will fill out those ranks. We're trying to take risk where we can to move as many people out into those components as possible, but it's just going to take some time before they really come up to the level that I know they need.
This is not a statement to not resource them because they need it, but what the team did in that large of an exercise, multiple services, multiple combatant commands participate, it was impressive to see.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so we've got just a few minutes left. Let's wrap. I'll do another moderator privilege here. So many of the folks in the audience have likely heard, especially if they were paying attention to Hippie's intro, they've heard about the Legacy Guardian Act, passed in the FY25 National Defense Authorization Act. So from your perspective, can you shed a little more light on why that recognition is important?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with understanding that we're 6 years old. And as much as I've said about, hey, we had to establish and there was nothing before us and we started from scratch, I got to acknowledge that there were people before the Space Force was established that contributed significantly to military space. And many of them did that in the Air Force. Air Force officers, Air Force airmen that were contributing to military space before there was a Space Force. And we took advantage of all of that knowledge, all of that experience corporately as we made decisions about how the Space Force should stand up. So the Legacy Guardian program is just recognition of that. It's saying that there were airmen that dedicated their time in service to focusing on military space missions, and that we benefited as a service from all the work that had gone before. And we just wanted to recognize them, and with the help of Congress, we've been able to do that, to establish that Legacy Guardian program. In fact, if it's okay.
Oh, please.
What I'd like to do is ask Bill Wolf and maybe Mark Dreiling.
There's nothing better than surprising
I know,
Bill
I love
Wolf,
it.
so this is
It's my
going to be great.
favorite. And Mark Dreiling. Is Mark here too? Come on up real quick. And I want to just acknowledge these two, because it's one thing to say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we were able to formally recognize airmen who contribute to military space? That's a great idea. Somebody's got to actually do the hard work. Somebody's actually got to get something written in the law to make that a reality. Somebody's got to do all the advocacy work to make sure there's the votes you need to make that happen. And in my opinion, nobody had more impact than these two on that effort. You see what Bill's accomplished with the Space Force Association, with this Spacepower Conference. That organization is now a tremendous advocate for the Space Force writ large. His work, he retired as an airman in the U.S. Air Force, but dedicated his time in the service to military space, to the space enterprise. Mark actually, in a former life, worked for me back at Buckley, way back when. So this is another airman who dedicated his service and time to military space. Mark worked for Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska, and was, as an introducer of the bill that turned into the Legacy Guardian program. And as great as Congressman Bacon is, he wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have thought of that had it not been for Mark kind of bringing that to light and doing all the hard work that we know has to happen for those things to actually get a signature on them and become law. So for these two gentlemen, what I'd like to do is make you the first two Legacy Guardians. All right? Oh, yeah. There's the pin. I want you to figure out. Let me get one for Mark, too. And then there's your pen, Mark. Thank you, sir. Nice job. All right. Thank you. Awesome. All right.